Good afternoon, and welcome to my webinar on the basics of writing evaluation questions. So before we start, I have to warn you that there are a lot of text-heavy slides in this presentation. I wanted to make sure that I added enough examples to help you design your own questions. So I'll make sure that the PowerPoint is available on my website along with this recorded version. So please feel free to ask questions during the webinar or after using the Q&A tool. And I'll spend a few minutes at the end answering those questions. So let's begin. So this webinar is basically designed with one thing in mind. It's about writing evaluation questions so that you can collect the right data at the right time. So at the end, you should be able to create meaningful questions. This means you'll know what questions to ask to ensure you have the data to show program outcomes. So keep in mind, all questions on a survey must have some purpose. And you should have an idea of the reason you're asking the question before you send out the survey. So you'll also be able to select the most appropriate response options for different questions. This basically involves a discussion on questions, variable types, and in other words, you should use close-ended response instead of leaving it open-ended. Should you use Likert type scales? Should you use open-ended questions, or should it simply be a yes and no question? Finally, we'll also talk about the different type of questions, but I do not plan to dive very deep into data analysis. We'll keep this conversation very simple so you can see how your questions influence data analysis. So I have to mention, we all know the difficulty of conducting surveys. The biggest issue is getting people to respond. Response rates is one of the most challenging parts of collecting quality data. You're asking people to take time to answer questions they may or may not care about. So this is a tough sell, right? Especially for mail and online surveys. I'm sure at least one of you have deleted a survey invitation in the past. Think about why you actually deleted it. Was it because you weren't interested, the topic was irrelevant, or you didn't have the time? There are tons of reasons people ignore surveys. However, what we can do is make our survey appear important. We need to design our invitation letters and the questionnaire in a way that it tells the respondent the input is valued. So think about it from the minds of a respondent. They need to understand why the survey is important, why their participation is needed, and how can their responses help with something that is close and familiar to them. So in other words, they need to personally connect with the topic. So it is your job to ensure that respondents perceive high rewards and low cost to completing the survey. Rewards are not only monetary prize or prize incentives. They can be anything from some sort of intrinsic connection to the topic of the questionnaire. For example, if respondents care deeply about affordable health clinics in rural communities, then they might be more inclined to participate in a survey about health clinics, and they would think that their input is valued. So I always think about this survey from the respondent's standpoint. This is part of the reason I don't like generic templates surveys. Those are the type of surveys that most companies use to collect data. These surveys actually detach themselves from anything important, yet they ask that I take the time to provide a response. So from my standpoint, in this case, the cost outweighs the benefit, and I prefer to delete those emails. So cost is a major factor we must consider in surveys. We need to consider the questionnaire design, and think about if the questions are easy to answer. So we need to ask ourselves, can the respondent understand our terminologies? Are all the responses confidential or anonymous? So these affect the perceived cost or the risk of taking the survey. If they exceed the benefits, which is the monetary incentives or the intrinsic value, then the participant will not respond. In this regard, we need to convey some level of trust with the respondents. We need to make sure that they are protected from any cost or risk in taking the survey. So, for example, we can align our survey with USU extension so that that connection can create trust. So most people are aware of USU extension. So I recommend that you include the logo on all your surveys. So there are many tips to improve in your response rates. These are just some that I selected from the Dillman's tailored approach design. I'll add the complete list on my website, so you can go and view that after. To ensure you get the highest response rates possible, the first task is to create a complete sampling frame. In other words, put together a complete list of participants' email or contact information. This should include all participants of your target population. The idea is to build a full database of contact information to send your survey to. Also consider incentives such as gifts. For example, you can tell participants they can be entered into a draw to win like an Amazon Echo if they complete the survey. Remember, you need to communicate the benefits of taking the survey, and this includes incentives. Another tip is to make sure the questionnaire is very easy to follow. So you don't want questions and instructions that require participants to read it twice or 3 times. All items in the questionnaire should be direct and obvious at a first glance. This leads to good questionnaire design. So basic things like no double-barrel questions, formatting, numbering sections and questions, logical response options, and clear instructions are all the basics of crafting a good questionnaire. So I'll include the full list of tips on my website. The purpose of a good survey is to collect the right data at the right time. There must be some plan in place to ensure this happens, right? On my last webinar on creating an evaluation plan, that works well to help you collect the right data at the right time. So recall, the evaluation plan was created based on a logic model or the TOP model. It outlined the most relevant data you need to show program outcomes. So in brief, your surveys should give you the information you need to determine if participants gained knowledge, changed their attitudes, develop skills, or have intentions to adopt the practice or change their behavior. Then you want the information on actual behavior change. Data collection for short, medium, and long-term outcomes would occur at different times. So your evaluation plan is critical to helping you figure out when to conduct these follow-ups. With an evaluation plan, you'll have the framework you need to only ask the important questions. This goes a long way towards keeping the survey short and collecting the right information. So my biggest tip is to use an evaluation plan. So just a reminder, this was the evaluation plan I presented in my last webinar. It basically shows when to implement the survey, what type of data to collect in each survey, and how to collect the right data. Using this plan, I'll go through the steps to asking the right questions at the right time. This evaluation plan is also consistent with the TOP model, so please feel free to use it in your programs. So just take a second to look at the figure, and then I'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so now that you have a chance to look at the figure, I'll move on. So let's start with our very first survey. We're most interested in who our participants are at this point. We should think about who they are and what do they know. So let's talk about the first survey you give out to participants when they enter the program. This survey should have two sections, a knowledge pretest and demographics. For the knowledge pretest, this should be a series of exam type questions based on the actual program curriculum. Each questions each question should have a right or wrong answer, and a total score should be calculated for each participant. So the total score basically represents the baseline participant knowledge before the program. The slide shows an example of an exam type knowledge test. This is a standard multiple choice question for a program on food safety on farms. So as you can see, the right answer is D. So the participants get 1 point for selecting that right answer and 0 if they got it wrong. In the same attendance survey with the pretest, you can ask demographic questions. So in section 2 of the survey, you can ask all the key demographic questions you are interested in, and this mainly ties back to your target audience. The data collected from the demographic section helps you to figure out if your program is reaching the target audience. So for example, if your program is targeted towards large ranchers, for example, then you must ask at least 2 questions. These are you a rancher, and what is the size of your herd? So these questions are designed to show that your program is reaching the intended audience. Other basic demographic questions are county of residence, employment status, maybe income if that's important, and ethnicity. So this slide provides some example of standard demographic questions and the corresponding response options to those questions. So I recommend using close-ended questions for demographics because participants feel more comfortable checking boxes instead of writing personal responses. Now, while we're collecting demographic data and pretest knowledge in the first attendance survey, I highly recommend you keep this survey completely anonymous. This means you should have a separate sign-up sheet at the door for people to write their names and the contact information. This way, all data collected cannot be traced back to participants. Some participants are usually hesitant to link their names with the demographic type questions. So the attendance survey should be short. Try to keep the pretest exam, to a maximum of 20 questions, and make sure all those questions are based on the actual curriculum. Only ask the demographic questions that you need in order to identify your target audience. Remember, the goal is to create purposeful questions. So I recommend keeping the questionnaire to 1 page, printing on both sides. While that's technically 2 pages, it still feels less demanding on participants. So now in the exit survey, this is your opportunity to collect all the right information you need to show potential program outcomes. This survey would typically be longer than the attendance survey. So the key here is to create a good exit survey that is short, but not too short where you don't have enough information. That is, all questions must be easy to understand, have clear and appropriate response options, and require very little effort to complete. Remember, only ask the questions that are necessary to show outcomes. So the first section of the exit survey is the post-test. The post-tests are basically knowledge questions that you already asked in the pretest. So all you have to do here is copy and paste those items into this survey. So moving on to the next section, consider asking very basic questions on participants' satisfaction or reaction to the program. So you can ask, Did the instructor appear knowledgeable on the subject matter? And were you satisfied with the quality of the information you received in the program? So for this section, I think it is important to focus on the quality of information, the knowledge of the instructor, and the overall satisfaction with the program. So those are three questions that are most helpful in determining the quality of your activities. So keep this section brief, maybe 3 to 4 questions, and keep all close-ended. So strongly agree to strongly disagree, or any type of likely type items. So moving on to section 3, you can ask about participants' attitude towards the program or training. This section is important because it tells you if your participants even care about changing their behavior or adopting a recommended practice. So as I always say, I can know a lot about eating healthy, but if I don't care about doing so, then I wouldn't. So the idea in section 3 is to understand if participants care by asking about their perceptions of the benefits of change in their behavior. So attitudes deal really with participants' perception towards benefits. You can create a short list of questions that relate to the benefits of changing and ask if they agree or disagree with the statements. So this slide shows 2 examples of attitude questions for a food safety program. So as you can see, they both relate to the behavior or the recommended practice. So in other words, the questions ask if people understand the need for food safety practices on farm, if they know about the practices, but they don't think it's necessary, then they are less likely to adopt the practice. So in a nutshell, it's important to always understand people's attitude towards change, because it's often an important factor of change. So section 4 of the exit survey deals with skills. Basically, you want to understand if your participants are confident in their ability to make the change or adopt the practice. I may have the knowledge to do something, but maybe I don't have the practical skills to actually do it. So it's always a good idea to make sure participants are confident in their abilities. This can be as simple as cooking a meal, buying more fruits and vegetables, or the steps in conducting a small business audit. Skills and knowledge combined represent competency. So the idea is to collect the right data to state if your participants left the program with the competencies needed to change their behavior or adopt a practice. So this slide provides some example of questions that relate to skill. So you can see they both deal with action, the ability to do something. Just like attitude, these can be stated as items with a likely type response option. Also, the items deal with a specific skill, so participants can easily respond without having to think about some broad or abstract idea. So the final and somewhat most important part of the exit survey is aspirations or intentions. This section is by far the shortest, but it gathers critical information about the likelihood of behavior change in participants. The main purpose here is to ask a direct question about participants' plan to change their behavior or adopt a practice. You need to be as concise as possible. Looking at the examples on this slide, the medium-term outcome of the food safety program was to get farmers to implement an updated food safety plan, right? So as you can see, the aspiration question specifically asks, how likely are you to implement the new food safety plan on your farm within the next 3 months? The corresponding response options are strong, extremely likely to extremely unlikely. This is a 5-point scale. Notice the question is straightforward and provides a time frame. In this format, participants do not have to think about what you're asking because it's so specific. The same thing goes for a healthy eating program. You can ask participants if they are likely to do exactly what you want them to do. These type of questions align to your medium-term outcomes. But you're asking them in the exit survey because you're only interested in their intentions at this point. Now, if you ask questions related to knowledge, attitude, skills, and aspirations in the exit survey, now you have all the data to state if participants learned in new practice, have positive attitudes towards it, have the skill to change or adopt the practice, and have the intention to do so. You can get all this information from a well-crafted exit survey. While this seems like a lot of questions, the key is to keep each section in the exit survey very short. You can ask about 3 to 4 questions on attitude, skills, and 1 question on intention. So the exit survey, while it seems long, can be about 2 to 3 pages at most if you only ask purposeful questions. While all the information you collect from the exits survey, with those information, you can provide a very good picture or a rationale to assume or predict actual behavior change. So now if you have the resources to conduct a follow-up survey, please do so. A follow-up survey is very useful in showing actual behavior change or adoption. This survey, while the response rate is very low, it is usually the shortest instrument in the evaluation plan. So using the contact sign-up sheet that I talked about before, you can send out a very brief survey to all participants to collect information on actual behavior change. So as I said, this is very short, and you need to make sure that you're very clear when asking participants to complete it. Remember, to increase response rates, you need to maximize benefits and minimize cost to participants. So in this survey, be very concise and specific. Directly ask your participants if they changed their behavior or adopted a practice. This should ideally align to your medium-term goals. So from this slide, the follow-up survey of the food safety program specifically asks about implementing a food safety plan, and the response option is yes or no. So if someone says no, then you can have a follow-up question asking if they intend to change or adopt the practice, and if not. So be specific about how you phrase your desired changes and make sure it aligns to your medium-term outcome. Now, I'm just going to provide a brief overview of question types. I'll focus more on variables and analysis in my future webinars. So I wanted to introduce you to the concepts here. There are 3 main types of variables. These are nominal or categorical, ordinal, and interval variables. Nominal or categorical variables are those where the response are not ordered. That means no option is greater than another. A typical categorical or nominal variable are demographic questions such as gender, county of residence, and ethnicity. So the response options are simply a description of the participants. One response is not better than another. So while you may code the responses by numbers, for example, type of residence with 1 as rural, 2 as urban, and 3 as suburban, the coding value itself does not have any quantitative meaning, since we can't say that 2 is more than 1. So for ordinal variables, the response options have a ordered or a ranked interpretation. The most common example is Likert type questions. Using the example above, I think it is very important for workers to wash their hands with soap before handling fresh produce. So the response option ranges from strongly agree to strongly disagree, which strongly agree is usually coded as 5 and strongly disagree is usually coded as 1. In this case, strongly agree is better than strongly disagree, right? So the ordering here has some quantitative meaning. However, as an ordinal variable, we cannot say that strongly agree is 4 units more than strongly disagree. We can only say one is better than the other. For interval variables, the response option is usually in units. So for example, a question about age can be open-ended and the response is purely quantitative. Same goes for income and height. So interval, racial, or scale variables are those where the response options are strictly quantitative and the value represents some measure of exact units. In most extension surveys, we rarely have these types of variables since we mostly look at perceptions and attitudes. So in most cases, we tend to use ordinal variables because they tend to provide us with some flexibility on how we analyze the data. Data analysis is another topic I'd like to cover in my future webinars. So on this slide, I only wanted to introduce you with different question types so that you are aware of how to create response options. So these are some basic questions and the corresponding response options. A binary variable is simply a question with two possible responses. A categorical variable has two or more responses, but both binary and categorical variables in this table are regarded as a nominal variable. This is because the ordering of the response options do not have any quantitative meaning. So we cannot say one response is better than another. So this table provides some examples of an ordinal and interval variables. Notice for ordinal variables, the option can have a quantitative assignment. So for example, in row 1, if participant B rates the confidence to create a logic model as 100 and participant C rate the confidence as 50, then we know that participant B has greater confidence in the ability compared to participant C. But this is only a rating. We can't say that one is greater than the other by 50 units or how many units, because there are no units of confidence. So on the other hand, interval variables have actual units. So I'm looking at the example, we have size of farms in acres, we have age, and all those are interval variables because the option is an actual unit. If participant B has 200 acres, participant C has 150 acres, then we can easily say that participant B has 50 more acres than participant C. So this is the major and oftentimes critical distinction between ordinal and interval variables. We use a lot of ordinal variables, such as Likert type scales in extension, but we treat them like interval variables in the analysis when we use inferential statistics. This is somewhat controversial in social sciences, so I won't go more into that detail. So as always, that was a lot of information to take in, so I think it's best to stop. I'll take your questions now. So please use the Q&A tool if you have any questions. Okay, so it seems like there are no questions. So I appreciate you taking the time to participate in this webinar. And please look out for the recorded version and the PowerPoint on my website. Also, I'll send out a date for my next webinar very soon. So thank you and have a great afternoon.